Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. We are a nation of immigrants, and we take pride in being a nation of immigrants. Our strength comes partly from the rich diversity of our national immigrant experience. But ironically, throughout our history, our people and our laws have often treated immigrants unfairly and even cruelly. Especially when the economy is hurting, people tend to scapegoat immigrants. Now, at this stage of our nation's history, let's spend 1 hour looking at the laws regarding immigration and how we might improve those laws. Two guests will share their knowledge and insights with us. I'm happy to welcome Lisa Seifert and Michael Ramos. Lisa Seifert is an immigration attorney with 20 years of experience helping people at the Seifert Law offices in downtown Olympia. She's also president of the Washington State chapter of the Immigration Lawyers Association. Lisa has been a guest on the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation's TV program twice before, and it's good to have you back again.
Thanks for inviting me, Glenn.
Thanks, Lisa. Michael Ramos is the executive director of the Church Council of Greater Seattle, and that organization does all kinds of wonderful things, helping the religious community connect with each other and connect with the real world. He has a very strong background in working for a variety of social and economic justice and human rights issues. He has a particular interest in immigration, and he works well with the broad interfaith community and with issue-based advocacy groups. Michael, good to have you here on the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let's get just a little bit of a sense of what immigrants have contributed to our nation and our state. People currently think about immigration problems, but we don't look at what immigrants actually have contributed. Can you say something of that?
Well, immigrants historically have contributed economically to our country. In some ways, they're the backbone of our economy, from building the railroad tracks to working in factories and shipyards to today, meat cutters, hotel workers, janitors working in businesses such as Microsoft. They're the backbone of our economy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our previous governor, Gary
Locke.
Locke,
That's right.
his family is an immigrant family from China, although he was born here. And I think Washington State, probably more than many states, has its share, certainly a large share of people in the government and in industries, in every sector, more immigrants than in some other states. And everybody sees them in every walk of life.
Right.
Washington State is such an agricultural state. Agricultural workers historically have been immigrants and are in our state and have contributed so much to making the state so vibrant economically in that area.
And fisheries, and my grandparents did a whole lot of things to help build the state. The premise of the program is that the immigration system that we have here is really broken in a whole lot of ways, and there are practical and humane ways to fix it. Can we give just a little overview of how the immigration system is broken, and then during the rest of the program we'll detail those and we'll also look at solutions. So an overview of how the system is broken?
Well, I guess I can start with that. The system is based on laws, like a lot of our systems, and the laws have been written and rewritten over the last 100 or so years. And it's a piecemeal system in every part of immigration. For example, the citizenship rules are written at a different time than the rules related to bringing somebody here. The rules regarding hiring only legal workers come from 1986. The rules regarding who can or how to penalize people if they've been here illegally come from 1996. It's a real patchwork system, and that's a lot of the problem we have now, is that it's not one document. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I can give a specific example of something that's broken now, and that would be the system is based on petitions, I guess. If we're talking about immigrants coming into the country, either they come normally a family basis or on an employment basis. And I'll just exemplify the employment side. An employer now who wants a worker, whether they want an agricultural worker or they want somebody to run some engineering research at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Institute, either one of those employers should really be able to get the worker they want. After, of course, sifting through American workers, if they find that their number one worker or the worker they want comes from another country, our laws should enable that to happen. And now it's not predictable, and it's basically not possible. It's kind of surprising. I think most people don't know that Microsoft really can't get the workers that they want to get, and neither can your average apple grower or agriculture owner. If they are experiencing a labor shortage and they want to turn to immigrants as illegal immigrants, they are just not going to be able to know whether or when that can happen. So that's one example of where the system isn't working.
And you're saying that this exists really throughout the whole labor market. It's not just like we think the stereotype of farm workers, but it's throughout other sectors as well, from what you're from your
right,
examples.
and perhaps we'll get into this a little bit later, but there's kind of a demography problem. I mean, we do not have enough workers in this country, period, to cover the jobs that have to be filled. But yeah, it's at every sector. It's at the unskilled sector and at the very highly skilled sector.
And I think that the fact, another indicator that the system is broken is that we have 12 million people here undocumented. That indicates something is wrong with the system when that's happening.
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, people migrate because they have to, not because they want to. And in order to be reunited with a spouse, in order to work a job and put food on the table for their families, people will cross borders. People will extend themselves in any way to be able to survive. And our economy understands that we need workers to be able to supply many of the jobs. Unfortunately, many of the rights and privileges that come from hard work, paying taxes, do not accrue to many of the immigrants. And so people are suffering and struggling. They want to have a pathway to citizenship. They want to have a way to reside in peace with their families and to be an active and vibrant part of their communities. But right now, we have long separations for family members, and the policy underneath allows for a lot of workplace raids, for lengthy detentions, and for deportation, sometimes without due process. And so when we talk about a broken immigration system, it's partly on the backs of those workers on whose labor we depend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll be exploring these kinds of problems throughout the hour. Legal immigrants also have difficulties. Can you tell us something of that?
Sure. Well, citizens and legal immigrants might be shocked to know that if they want to bring their relative here from another country, a legal immigrant, a person with a green card, might have to wait 8 to 9 years to bring their spouse here. It's shocking. I mean, where is the family value in that? And if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to bring your spouse here, or your spouse happens to be undocumented and you're married to that person, don't you have a right to have them here? And under our current laws, you don't, because the laws create a system where that person has to leave the country and perhaps be outside for 10 years. So that's the separation that Michael was talking about. So those are a couple problems that people who are citizens or legal immigrants here have.
We have many families of mixed status, and so we have many millions, 3 million citizen children of parents who may not have authorization to be in the country, but may be seeking status. And so under current policy, it's hard for the adults sometimes to become citizens, and they don't have necessarily a future here. But we don't often look at the effect on the children of splitting up families, of separating them because of detention and possible deportation.
So if somebody is born in this country, that being born here means that you're a citizen, even if your parents were not citizens or might not even be here legally.
That's in our Constitution. If you're born in this country, you are a citizen by birthright.
Right. And then if your parents are not here legally, boy, your whole family is at risk then.
Well, and we do have many instances, even in Washington State, of families being separated. I know a woman who was detained for a month recently and has 4 children, is a single parent, and that month was very traumatic on the children, and it has taken many months to help a family achieve a level of stability, but still the mom is facing possible deportation, and fortunately many church groups and others are standing with her, but so many people go without legal representation or support to be able to find a pathway to be able to regularize their status in this country.
If there is a pathway. I mean, that's kind of the biggest problem, is that there's so many people. In my practice, I talk to several people every single week who do not have any option at all. They don't have a U.S. citizen family member who could even think about sponsoring them. And they're just here, they're living, they're working, they're not creating any problem, and they have no way under the current system. It's not that they just are not ambitious enough or don't have enough money, it's simply that there's no way. So people are stuck, and they might have U.S. citizen children here, but those parents don't have a way.
What other problems do people who don't have documentation face if they're in this country? Are there other, we've talked about some, one thing that you hear about sometimes is if somebody is working and your employer is treating you unfairly or making you work in unsafe conditions or not paying you what the employer had offered, you're kind of stuck, because if you complain, you hear about cases where the employer threatens to turn you into the immigration authorities.
Yeah, unfortunately that does happen. So that's a good example.
I mean,
Sure, and I think that in general, it's hard to maintain and keep a job in this economy, let alone a job where workers are treated fairly and are paid a living wage and have access to health care. For immigrants who are seeking status or who may be residents but are not citizens yet, oftentimes they can be in the workplace and they can be taken advantage of because they will not speak up, and they're often paid less. At the same time, it's difficult for employers too to ascertain, who they can keep in the workplace. So we need a system that allows for people to come to work, and for employers to be able to have the confidence to maintain their workforce. But for those who are working, even in places like downtown Seattle, it's very, very difficult. And sometimes we don't realize the breadth of the immigrant community. Janitors in downtown Seattle speak 26 different languages, for example.
Yeah, there's a stereotype. People think it's mostly a Latino thing, and people are here from just every country. I mean, I don't know how many countries have been represented in your practice.
In my practice, we figured at one point that it was almost 150.
Different nations.
Yes, different nations. We stopped counting a long time ago, but it's something, I mean, I have that on my website, so I think we verified it at some point, and that's Olympia, you know, so people are always so surprised that there's such diversity.
Yeah.
Since 9/11, often immigrants from various countries are perceived as a threat to our society, and one of the things that needs to be challenged and changed through law is to recognize the real contributions that immigrants make in so many different ways to our society, and then rather than perceive different immigrant communities as threat, to find ways to support their existence and ability to have the status and livelihood that we expect in the America that I think we dream and aspire to be.
Right. We've talked a bit about the employment situation from the employees' side, and you mentioned a little bit about from the employers' side. Are there other things that you could mention about the way the system is broken from the employer
Well,
side?
sure. I mean, in this year and even recently, President Obama has made it a priority to punish employers or to target employers who they feel are employing undocumented individuals, and so there have been audits that have happened. There have been raids that have happened.
Yeah, some highly publicized, massive raids.
Massive raids.
Meatpacking plants around the country.
Right, and in Washington State, I guess the most famous one at the moment is the Yamato Engineering Company, I think that's what it was called, Yamato Engine Specialists in Bellingham, had a highly publicized raid earlier in the year, and they had a workforce of, I don't remember, but they had, I'm just bad on the numbers now, but they had massive numbers of ICE agents come in, and ICE is the enforcement arm of Homeland Security,
Customs enforcement.
Immigration Customs Enforcement, right? And the numbers don't really matter. The point is that employer and most employers thought they were doing the right thing. They had the right paperwork filled out. They had a large immigrant workforce, but the employers themselves, the owners of the company, were immigrants from Africa, and so. You know, not that they would look askance or try to break the law. I think they were trying pretty hard to follow the law. And most employers, and this is the problem, most employers are going to follow the law. The law says when you hire somebody, you have them fill out a form, an employment authorization form, that asks them to show a document that says who they are, which could be a driver's license, and a document that says they're eligible to work, which could be a Social Security card. They show those two things, they complete the top part of a form, and the employer fills out the rest of it and puts it in a drawer. And that's the system that we have.
So the employer is operating in good faith.
Yes.
They're not trying to beat the system. They're following the law and doing what they think is the right thing.
That's right. And they could hire people and then find out maybe 10 years later or more that one of these workers isn't documented. And they could find that out a number of different ways. But the employer at that time is kind of stuck, because unless they have some specific directive that says you have to fire this person, and that's not what happens. They get a letter from Social Security that says these people might have a problem with their status. But I guess backing up, the problem is that there is not a way for an employer to know with 100% certainty who is authorized to work, and there is no, our country doesn't have a mechanism that ensures that people are authorized. So,
and it's not legal to say, "Are you a U.S. citizen?"
Exactly. The person can say, "Show me your identity document and your proof of ability to work."
Yeah.
One of the important features of the Bellingham raid was the public outcry that occurred that said, this is not the way we ought to proceed if we're trying to have a comprehensive immigration reform. And this raid was the culmination of many raids that have occurred across the country over the last several years, and it being the first during the time when President Obama was in office. Many people have felt that this was a time where comprehensive immigration reform was a real possibility. And so Secretary Napolitano went out so far as to say she would investigate what happened during the raid, and there has been an effect where it appears that workplace raids may not be so much the norm anymore. However, there are other enforcement mechanisms that are taking place toward
such as
employers.
these audits, right? Right. So the policy seems to be away from going after hundreds and hundreds of workers and more toward targeting those employers. And the employers, as we've said, they're not necessarily complicit. I think a lot of Americans might think that it's intentional, that employers are really trying to dodge the rules, but they're not. They have probably complied as best they were able to, and they're kind of hanging out there because in an industry, well, agriculture, construction, it's a fairly well-known fact that a high percentage of those workers are likely undocumented. And how does that happen? Well, the employees want to work. The workers want to work. And so they're going to get whatever documents they can, and they're probably fake documents. The employer is not a document expert. They're not supposed to be. They just look at what's presented to them. So this is how it could be that somebody who's not documented ends up employed at a place, and the employer has this horrible liability for filling out a form wrong, liability for having an alien worker, an unauthorized alien worker, liability for encouraging them to stay. All of these are potential federal felonies. And the employer, it's a pretty rude surprise to find that on your doorstep when you thought your workers were legal.
There are some other angles that we haven't looked at yet where other problems that are caused. These immigration problems of the enforcement end of things have been difficult, and the federal government has been trying to get local law enforcement agencies to enforce federal immigration laws, and local law enforcement agencies don't want to do that. The Washington State Sheriff's Association wrote to our state's 2 senators in June 2009, and their letter referred to what they call a broken immigration system. And the letter said the United States government has dumped the problems onto local communities. And the Washington State Sheriff's Association asked the federal government to pass comprehensive immigration reform that is, quote, just and humane, unquote, and to maintain a clear, quote, distinction between federal officials who enforce civil immigration law versus local law enforcement who enforce criminal law, unquote. So, I mean, the brokenness of the system is even imposing a burden on local law enforcement agencies who don't want to get caught up in something they see as not.
Fortunately in Washington State, we don't have too many jurisdictions where law enforcement wants to do that. I think there is some Seattle suburb, though, that wants to do it, right?
Well,
but generally they don't. In the Sheriff's Association.
Well, what's the community, though?
Well, there is a city that we know of in King County where there is a regular practice, even without an explicit agreement with federal authorities, where routinely local authorities enforce immigration law and send them straight to the detention center in Tacoma. That composes part of the population of 1,000 people at the detention center on any given night there. So unfortunately, whether through formal agreement or informal agreement, even in Washington State, we have some situations where local authorities feel the freedom to take on immigration law, though it may not be without any kind of explicit authorization.
Or
training. And this causes a lot of fear in our communities, and so that's part of the picture here.
Well,
there's a lot of suffering, there is a lot of fear, and a potential for abuse. And so when we have enforcement-only policies, this is what you have in the absence of a comprehensive immigration reform package that gets to the root of the issues and finds a way to transform this situation.
So if the solution really is good comprehensive immigration reform laws, what would be some of the elements of that? We can list a few of them, then we'll explore in some depth some of these. So
well, I mean, I guess the first one that has to be mentioned is we need to find a way to legalize the illegal or the undocumented population that we have now. So a path for them to become residents and then citizens is important. Not necessarily ahead of other people who are waiting, but as I said, those people are stuck. So number one would be legalize that population somehow.
And what else?
Another issue is the objective of family reunification. We mentioned family values, and I think from our standpoint, reuniting loved ones, spouses, parents and children, brothers and sisters, is extremely important for the integrity of the families, but also the integrity of our communities. The contributions of immigrant families to our society in building up the cultural strength and assets is a value that sometimes is not spoken about. And so the objective of eliminating the long backlogs for people to be able to join with one another again safely and securely is extremely important. I would say that a couple of other values involve workplace protections for all working people in this country who are as basically a moral right and a human right, to allow people to be able to work successfully without intimidation, but also with the objective of being very productive and being paid fairly.
I'd say related to the family reunification and getting rid of the backlogs in the family sector would be getting rid of the backlogs in the employment sector. In addition to the other employment issues I mentioned a minute ago, there are long backlogs. If an employer wants to employ a worker at a professional level, say the person has a bachelor's degree, right now they would be waiting 5 to 6 years for that employee. If the employee had a master's degree or higher, the wait might be somewhat shorter, but who's going to wait? I mean, the system is broken if there's such a long backlog. So we have to ensure enough visas, because in our current system we have a set number, like a quota, and it's too small. It was written by Congress in, I think, the 1950s, and so this is what I was saying before. We have laws that were written at different times, and it's not a unified whole that's meaningful today. So ensure enough visas on the family side, on the employment side.
It seems like there's also an element of lack of due process in the current system where people just don't have a chance to get real justice from the immigration system. You need a lawyer. It's so complex, you need a lawyer. And a lot of people don't have lawyers, and people are just, the system just seems stacked against the people.
Well, that's certainly true. Since 1996, under President Clinton, we passed a horrible law that took away jurisdiction in the federal courts from looking at these problems. If a person was going to bring up a complaint against an immigration officer or against an immigration court, they're not going to be able to get it addressed in federal court. Jurisdiction was stripped from those courts. That's just one part of that due process problem. And so any immigration reform really needs to look at what happens on the deportation side or on the appeal side too, because Congress has been able to write whatever they wanted every time, and the restrictionists have written those laws. So we need to go back and fix that.
There's one of the things related to the employment thing that you had mentioned to me. There's a problem about, there is a system about an e-verification, some way of, there's some inadequate and inaccurate.
Well, there's a pilot program now that a lot of people talk about. About 130,000 employers are participating in. It's called E-Verify. Okay. And E-Verify is an electronic database system, basically. And it's a voluntary system, and if an employer uses that, they can use it to screen new, not current, but new employees. And it's they pull up a database, they put in the person's name and social security number, and then it is supposed to automatically, within a few seconds, check against the social security database and any other federal databases. And if the person's name and social security don't match in the system, then you get a no match. And there's a lot of problems with it because our whole social security database isn't the best, and it's never been used for anything like this before. So There's percentages of error. Some people say 5%. People that I've talked to who use the E-Verify system in their own workforces say, no, it's like 12 to 15%.
Yeah.
And you could have a situation where you get this false positive and you have to lay off somebody who is a citizen. So I think any part of immigration reform will have to have a system that employers can use. It's important. I mean, if we're going to legalize people, we have to maybe have some kind of super secure card or something and then have that in an electronic system. We have to be able to rely on something like that, but what we have now is not really ready for prime time.
Yeah, it sounds sloppy, like the no-fly list that, like the late Senator Ted Kennedy was on the no-fly list.
Oh, sure, lots of people have been on.
And he was a powerful U.S. senator, and he, for years, could not get himself off that list. There's no way to fix it. I mean, so if there is some kind of a database, some kind of a system, it's got to have a way to be cleaned up.
Of course, that's a whole different database than the employment database.
No, I know, but I mean, the notion of I don't want to get stuck with a database that's
that you can't fix,
as bad and unfixable. Yeah.
Well, on a human level, it's very disruptive to families, people trying to work, and they may be authorized to work, but they could be on the list, or their documents may not be verified, and so I think it creates a lot of fear and uncertainty in different communities across the country. And while perhaps in some parts of Washington State there are attorneys who can help articulate and defend the workplace rights of different immigrant communities. In other parts of the country, it may be few and far between the opportunities for legal access if there's a discrepancy that shouldn't be there, and employees who have a right to work are not able to continue and support their families.
If it seems like part of fixing the system would be to find ways to help people move toward English proficiency, job skills, citizenship, and we've mentioned citizenship before. Basically, support for integrating people into our society and our economy and stuff. Are there some elements of that you folks would like to see?
Well, Washington State has a model underway, a New Americans Policy initiative. And there's a policy council that Governor Gregoire has convened, and groups like One America were very important in helping to support legislation that was signed by the governor that allows for efforts to be redoubled for citizenship preparation, English as a second language, job training, apprenticeships, opportunities for immigrant communities to both come together and build up their family life. So these are kinds of measures that allow for a greater level of integration of the many thousands of immigrants who are here and have a future in this state.
So again, a positive thing that besides fixing the problems, there are some positive things that we could be doing, and that we are in Washington. That's good to have that underway.
It is. The citizenship initiative is important. I mean, many immigrants don't become citizens when they could. Immigrants generally can become a citizen 5 years after they obtain legal immigrant status, and many don't because they don't know how, or they think it's hard, or it's expensive. And so encouraging that to happen helps them get that done, and then they can maybe bring other family members or vote, participate more in the society.
I think it's important to point out that while we're looking at a broken immigration system, immigration itself and immigrants are not a problem. They are human beings who are trying to live the livelihood and contribute to this society. And I think there are many proactive ways that are in place and supported by the state of Washington as well, that provide for a level of care, concern, and opportunity, creating opportunities in this trade-dependent state.
Right.
What better place to do it, that allows for a future for these families, for the well-being of our entire community.
Yeah. It seems as though that a lot of immigrants would have a lot of things in common with low-income people or people who are disenfranchised in various ways, where like a rising tide lifts all boats. So things like improving minimum wage, improving basic safety net, and economic and social status of people at the bottom end of society would seem to help everybody else along with immigrants. And not that all immigrants are poor, but disproportionately they're underemployed. Many people come here with skills, but they're not working at their professional skill level because they're, for whatever reason, stuck at some lower level.
Well, I think we need to have a perspective of appreciation for the resiliency of many in our immigrant community, their ability to struggle and to survive and to work at sometimes jobs that, as you mentioned, are below what their training is, and the ability to keep on going and to build communities and to build families.
When I can imagine if most people were going to do a TV interview program like this and talk about immigration, they would jump on what can we do to defend the border, what can we do to build a bigger wall, or all those kinds of things. And we haven't gotten into that yet, but we should address something of the border issues because there are aspects of the brokenness of our system in what we do with borders, and there are some of the solutions that you may recommend have to do with borders, but it's nothing that we want to jump on as the first solution. I'm glad that we've addressed these other issues first.
Well, it's good there's not somebody here that's going to throw that up for us to talk about initially, but I'll say something about that first. And I think it's important for our country to be able to say who can be here and who can't be here. It seems to me that we haven't really seriously enforced our border ever. And we could if we wanted to. And I think we probably should, and maybe especially since 9/11. And we have to do that in a humane way and in a fair way. And I believe that any immigration reform that happens has to address that probably almost first. And most of the bills that you see written do have that as the first thing. And by address that, I mean not allow people in the country who don't have documents. But on the other hand, you have to allow the people here who do qualify to get a job, who do qualify to be in this new system. So we create a new system that says you can be here if you've already been here, or if you qualify for a job in some way, or if somebody sponsors you. So if you have legal ways for people to come in that are adequate, then there will not be a huge pressure for people to enter illegally. So if you fix the legal system, this is how I see it anyway, Michael might see it differently.
So
if you fix the legal system,
you fix a legal solution, you fix legal pathways.
Then you will not have the huge pressure of people to just come in. And I think you won't have the huge pressure, and then you have to make that wall or something. You have to make there be a system so that it's serious, because otherwise we'll be facing this again in another 10 years or 15 years.
So the legal option that you're suggesting would include things like having ways for people to get legal status and work arrangements, and
or
not
just
having
visitors.
the limitations on the visa, or these various kinds of things that we've talked about thus far, become elements of the legal alternative.
Yeah, those are ways to stop illegal immigration.
Yeah.
If you start legal immigration and you fix legal immigration, you are going to stop illegal immigration, I think.
People will climb a fence. They will go underground to be able to see a loved one and to work at a job that allows them to support their families. Years ago I was in the state of Jalisco in Mexico and asked a church gathering how many people there had relatives working in the United States. Well, every hand went up. This is about 1996. And years later, the church leader, the lay coordinator there, I ran into her. She had migrated to Sacramento to join her husband. Evidence that people will do whatever it takes to join with each other. We have to, one of the phenomena that we have to stop is the deaths at the border. More than 3,000 people have died crossing the southern border since 1994. And so there's another element to the whole border enforcement and a necessity to reform the immigration system to allow people to be able to be joined together, to be able to work, to be authorized, and to have a future in this country without fear of being deported.
Yeah. Yeah, people die walking across the desert.
That's right.
And volunteers will put out water and food and things to help them make that transition. But that's really an odd way of doing things.
Yeah, you can
Better
get
to fix
arrested
it.
for that, I heard.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. Somebody was busted for putting out water for these people. They were charged with littering in on federal land. Part of this mania for enforcement has to do with the brutal detention centers and things, and we mentioned the one in Tacoma on the tide flats in the industrial area. Could either of you tell us something about that, and then we want to move on to some other aspects of solutions?
Well, Lisa has spent some time there, but just to say that here we have a privately run facility, a Geo Corporation, housing 1,000 people a night, and trying to build a space for 500 more people. And so you don't build a bigger facility unless you intend to fill it and to make a profit at doing it. And there's something wrong with a system that sends people from several states to this place in Tacoma where they often, for the most part, don't have legal representation and don't have a place to go except to be deported. This is a part of our system. Without a comprehensive immigration reform, we're talking about building more and more prisons. We're talking about prisons that house families, all because the enforcement-only philosophy seems to be holding sway. So something has to be done about a system that is, ever reinforcing this concept that building bigger detention centers and holding more people is going to somehow make our country more secure.
I want to make sure that we mention that people should have due process. I don't know that we've had that. Have we mentioned that yet in this interview?
We did,
a little
sort of.
bit. Okay. Is there anything else to ask about?
Well, I can add to that since he's just talking about the detention center.
Yeah.
The detention center also has a full set of immigration courts there. And in immigration court, it's really a deportation court. These are detained people, and over 90% of them are unrepresented at their hearings. And one aspect of just immigration reform might be that we require competent representation and that the government pays for it, because now the rubric is you have the right to be represented by the attorney of your choice at no expense to the government. And so that makes this burden fall on the pro bono immigration lawyer system, of which there is one organization, which is the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project.
And they do wonderful work, but
they do, but there's not enough lawyers.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I've been to a number of hearings at that detention center, and it's person after person after person. It's one person in 15 that has a lawyer. And so most people don't have anybody to represent them there, and any real just or due process would pair that person up with somebody who could explain their legal rights to them before they take a verdict.
See, these large prison facilities reinforce the notion that immigrants who migrate are criminals. And we talk about federal law, we talk about immigration violations being of a civil nature, and yet we house people in these facilities and treat them in such a way where it gives the message that they're somehow criminals, and here are people who are just struggling for a livelihood and a future.
It's a social and economic system that's dysfunctional, and then it gets reframed as if it were a criminal matter by the prisons that we
True, and they're in the orange and red jumpsuits.
Yeah.
I mean, they look like any other criminal you've ever seen in a jail lockup.
So what are the prospects of actually being able to enact some comprehensive reform for our broken immigration system in the near term, say within the next year or so?
You go first.
Well, I think there has been a lot of energy and a lot of advocacy toward and including with the support of members of Congress, toward putting forth a comprehensive immigration bill. I think the healthcare debate and the length of that and the contentiousness of that is causing somewhat of a delay in terms of bill going forward and a robust debate on the issues toward a successful conclusion. So this could delay for many months, if not for a year, any kind of immigration reform. However, we think a bill will come forward, and hopefully with the successful resolution of healthcare reform, it will be lined up such that perhaps early next year we may be having a strong debate, and this will hope and even may come up sooner than that.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm very positive that we are going to have reform. I mean, we have so many groups lined up to do it, and the political stars seem to be aligned too. More and more people understand that we need to fix the problem with having 12 million people in a kind of lower status. That's a problem. Employers, like I said, employers do not want to be hanging out there potentially having federal criminal liability just for having employees. Senator Lindsey Graham, a prominent Republican, and Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, are both working on bills. Those will be the two people who lead this through Congress. President Obama just recently at a Hispanic Caucus gala dinner was talking about health care reform, and the comment by that Senator Joe Wilson, that illegal immigrants would or wouldn't be covered, and he said, "You lie," and of course that's controversial. But what President Obama said about that was, we can't ignore the fact that the immigration system is completely broken. And so, and that it's a priority for him. In fact, it's his third priority, which is as high as it's been in my life. After healthcare, after energy comes immigration. So now we're doing healthcare. I think healthcare, well, I guess I won't talk about that, but in our congressional delegation, most everybody is pretty solidly in favor, at least what they told us when we visited them in Washington, D.C., of comprehensive immigration reform. They want to do it. They want to see what the bill would be like, but they have businesses pushing them, they have immigrants pushing them, they have faith groups pushing them, they have progressives pushing them. They have the people who are against it are a vocal minority. And the Congress, I think, is starting to look at it more positively. A lot of polls that you see over the last year are really turning. When you ask the American people, if you ask the question the right way, if you ask them, do you think immigrants, illegal immigrants, should be forced to register, to come out of the shadows and apply? They say yes. Do you think they should have to? Yes. Do you think if you also ask them, do you think that those people should be deported? They might say yes. But if you ask them, should we have a system that makes them do it? I mean, it's interesting to read those polls. And one other thing I'd say about that is that in the election in 2008, a lot of Congress people ran on a real strong anti-immigrant stance. They wanted to do this enforcement, and they looked at 22 races where that was the main issue. And the people, whether they were incumbent or whether they were challengers, the people who took the hard anti-immigrant stance lost in 20 of the 22 races. And it's really pretty stunning. The numbers are changing more and more, which is why I think we can actually be hopeful and actually not be apathetic. I don't think it's going to just pass by this time. I think we have a chance to push it.
Yeah, I read some of the reports of polling data and saw what you said, where it's been shifting, and even there, one poll was saying that even 62% of Republicans want a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are not documented. And then another poll of Republicans found strong support for comprehensive reform. So it seems to be shifting among a lot. The faith communities have done a huge amount.
Well, our faith traditions are very strong in supporting and affirming the rights of all immigrants in our communities. Some of our faith communities are made up of sizable immigrant populations. And so people have been very active in the advocacy from a humanitarian basis and from a faith basis to say that we need a just, humane immigration system that allows people a future, be able to support their families, to live integrally together, and to form a strong part of our communities as the contributors to the society that they are.
Are there some obstacles that you're seeing out there that we need to find ways to strategize around or neutralize in some way?
Well, I guess one would be just a lot of lack of knowledge still. There's more and more information about immigrants and immigration, but every day people ask me a question that I thought must have been out by now. You know, for example, why don't these people who are the 12 million, why don't they just, you know, apply? And it's like, oh, obviously I need to talk to you for a minute to tell you what, you know, that there isn't an option for them. So I think we need to keep talking about it, and in a civil way, of course. So information would be one thing that's lacking.
And this is the third program we've done on the Olympia FOR's TCTV program about immigration since the first one was September of 2006, and then we did May 2008, and now we're doing October 2009, and we may do this again, who knows?
Well, education is absolutely a key. Washington State and every state of this union, people need to hear, they need to have discussions, coffee table conversation around the issue of immigration, whatever one's point of view. That is absolutely essential. And then you start to hear some of the stories of immigrants and what their lives are like, how health care is not a given, how housing is not a given. And so when there's a downturn in the economy, sometimes immigrants can get scapegoated. We've seen that before in this country. By education, by dialogue, by coming to know immigrants not as others, but as part of us, we start to have a different train of thought at play, and the promise of a reform that helps to build up our entire society.
And I was impressed with how many organizations are out there, and new ones coming along, working on things. I want to just mention a few that exist, and then we can people can contact the Olympia Fellowship for Reconciliation to get contact information for them. But you're with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and you're president of the statewide chapter of it. The Church Council of Greater Seattle is involved with all kinds of good stuff. Local faith communities and networks of interfaith bodies and ecumenical bodies do a lot of good stuff. There's a group called One America that's based in Seattle. There's the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project that you mentioned, has been doing wonderful work. And they're locally in the Olympia and Shelton area, there's Bridges Not Walls, very grassrootsy, very much solidarity, very much trying to inform the community. They do wonderful things. In Olympia, there's Project Cielo. They do really good work on all kinds of practical things, GED and Spanish and all kinds of things. There's a new thing called Reform Immigration for America that I had not heard about before. And I looked at their list of who has signed on, what organizations, and it's all kinds of good organizations that have signed on, various parts of, well, all kinds of places. What would you like our viewers to be doing?
Well, the last organization you mentioned there, that Reform for Immigration, there's an acronym. It's like RI, the number 4, and then the A.org. If you go to that website, you can get involved even with your cell phone. You can text a number. You can text actually the word justice to a number that they designate, and then your cell phone is in this network. So when I get messages every few weeks. Did you do that too? So it's kind of fun. You get the message and it'll say, call the president now about this. And the more people that do that, and the more this spreads, you know, if they can get 100,000 or 1 million calls when it's a critical time, that's what one thing an average person can do to contact. I mean, that's a direct way to contact Congress.
And in our community groups and congregations, I look at my own congregation, a man in his mid-80s convenes letter writing every month on one issue, and he gets 60 letters at one sitting.
Wow.
Great.
Every month. And I'm saying, if he can do it, I challenge all the congregations and community organizations, whether you're calling in, emailing, or using your cell phone or writing. it is all important. It's very significant that we raise our voices now,
Yeah.
because the only way the tide will crest, come over the top for immigration reform is by people speaking out and really demanding that in the interest of fairness, in the interest of justice, in the interest of our well-being as a society, immigration reform now is necessary.
Yeah, we really are in this all together, just like employers and local law enforcement who are burdened by the federal system. And I mean, everything, this is a win-win for everybody if we do it right. I'm impressed with how much information is out there, and I think it would be fun to get together with a handful of people in somebody's living room and do like a 4-part study group. It's limited in scope, but you could learn a lot with some readings and 4 evenings of discussion. Stuff like that.
Yes.
That would be
Things
great.
like that would change. I wonder if you could offer a brief closing thought, each of you, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Well, I'll start with that. Staying on the political theme, I mean, President Obama about this issue has said, well, and others too, has said, make me do it. Make me do it. So I think we have to. He said the same thing about energy and the same thing about healthcare, and the people are now doing that. We're all raising our voices about that. We need to do it for immigration too.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
A basic human dignity demands that there be an immigration reform now. Immigrants are part of the fabric of our society, and the health of our society will be measured by having an immigration reform that addresses people as human beings and creates a pathway to a real future that sustains them and allows for the health of our entire community.
Great, well, thank you, Michael. I want to thank our guests, Lisa Seifert and Michael Ramos. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. We really are a nation of immigrants. The first people in this country immigrated here many thousands of years ago, and we're here when white folks started showing up. And the rest of us have all come along since at various times and in various ways, voluntarily or involuntarily. But we really are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation that values democracy and the full participation of all people. We're a nation that values fairness and justice. We're a nation that wants prosperity and the American dream for all people. And we've seen during this hour how the current immigration system is broken, falls short of all of those values that we hold dear, and we've explored a number of ways of fixing the immigration system. Nothing less than comprehensive immigration reform will meet the various needs, and we can accomplish that if we really are determined to do it. More and more parts of our society are recognizing the need to do this, and the time is now. So a great many organizations and resources are available to help you organize and advocate for humane and practical systems. For information about this or a variety of other issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolence, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship for Reconciliation at 360-491-9093. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can make the world a better place, but we all have to do our part. And the world needs exactly what you have to offer. Thanks. Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. We are a nation of immigrants, and we take pride in being a nation of immigrants. Our strength comes partly from the rich diversity of our national immigrant experience. But ironically, throughout our history, our people and our laws have often treated immigrants unfairly and even cruelly. Especially when the economy is hurting, people tend to scapegoat immigrants. Now, at this stage of our nation's history, let's spend 1 hour looking at the laws regarding immigration and how we might improve those laws. Two guests will share their knowledge and insights with us. I'm happy to welcome Lisa Seifert and Michael Ramos. Lisa Seifert is an immigration attorney with 20 years of experience helping people at the Seifert Law offices in downtown Olympia. She's also president of the Washington State chapter of the Immigration Lawyers Association. Lisa has been a guest on the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation's TV program twice before, and it's good to have you back again.
Thanks for inviting me, Glenn.
Thanks, Lisa. Michael Ramos is the executive director of the Church Council of Greater Seattle, and that organization does all kinds of wonderful things, helping the religious community connect with each other and connect with the real world. He has a very strong background in working for a variety of social and economic justice and human rights issues. He has a particular interest in immigration, and he works well with the broad interfaith community and with issue-based advocacy groups. Michael, good to have you here on the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let's get just a little bit of a sense of what immigrants have contributed to our nation and our state. People currently think about immigration problems, but we don't look at what immigrants actually have contributed. Can you say something of that?
Well, immigrants historically have contributed economically to our country. In some ways, they're the backbone of our economy, from building the railroad tracks to working in factories and shipyards to today, meat cutters, hotel workers, janitors working in businesses such as Microsoft. They're the backbone of our economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, our previous governor, Gary
Locke, that's right.
His family's an immigrant family from China, though he was born here. And I think Washington State, probably more than many states, has its share, certainly a large share of people in the government and in industries, in every sector, more immigrants than in some other states. And everybody sees them in every walk of life.
Right.
Washington State is such an agricultural state. Agricultural workers historically have been immigrants in our state and have contributed so much to making the state so vibrant economically in that area.
And fisheries, and my grandparents did a whole lot of things to help build the state. The premise of the program is that the immigration system that we have here is really broken in a whole lot of ways, and there are practical and humane ways to fix it. Can we give just a little overview of how the immigration system is broken, and then during the rest of the program we'll detail those and we'll also look at solutions. So an overview of how the system is broken?
Well, I guess I can start with that. The system is based on laws, like a lot of our systems, and the laws have been written and rewritten over the last 100 or so years. And it's a piecemeal system in every part of immigration. For example, the citizenship rules are written at a different time than the rules related to bringing somebody here. The rules regarding hiring only legal workers come from 1986. The rules regarding who can or how to penalize people if they've been here illegally come from 1996. It's a real patchwork system, and that's a lot of the problem we have now, is that it's not one document. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I can give a specific example of something that's broken now, and that would be the system is based on petitions, I guess, if we're talking about immigrants coming into the country. Either they come normally a family basis or on an employment basis. And I'll just exemplify the employment side. An employer now who wants a worker, whether they want an agricultural worker or they want somebody to run some engineering research at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Institute, either one of those employers should really be able to get the worker they want. After, of course, sifting through American workers, if they find that their number one worker or the worker they want comes from another country, our laws should enable that to happen. And now it's not predictable, and it's basically not possible. It's kind of surprising. I think most people don't know that Microsoft really can't get the workers that they want to get, and neither can your average apple grower or agriculture owner. If they are experiencing a labor shortage and they want to turn to immigrants as illegal immigrants, they are just not going to be able to know whether or when that can happen. So that's one example of where the system isn't working.
And you're saying that this exists really throughout the whole labor market. It's not just like we think the stereotype of farm workers, but it's throughout other sectors as well, from what you're from your
right,
examples.
and perhaps we'll get into this a little bit later, but there's kind of a demography problem. I mean, we do not have enough workers in this country, period, to cover the jobs that have to be filled. But yeah, it's at every sector. It's at the unskilled sector and at the very highly skilled sector.
And I think that the fact, another indicator that the system is broken is that we have 12 million people here undocumented. That indicates something is wrong with the system when that's happening.
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, people migrate because they have to, not because they want to. And in order to be reunited with a spouse, in order to work a job and put food on the table for their families, people will cross borders, people will extend themselves in any way to be able to survive. And our economy understands that we need workers to be able to supply many of the jobs. Unfortunately, many of the rights and privileges that come from hard work, paying taxes, do not accrue to many of the immigrants. And so people are suffering and struggling. They want to have a pathway to citizenship. They want to have a way to reside in peace